Welcome to Money in the Air, the music podcast about neighboring rights, the royalties you earn from the public performance of your recordings and the business of music in general. Brought to you by IFR, the International Association for Artists and Rights Holders. I'm Andrew, a royalty consultant helping artists to collect on their value.
Hi, I'm Gina Deacon. I work for Absolute Rights Management and I work with record labels and artists to ensure we claim the royalty income due to them.
I'm Stacey Haber and I'm from Inside Baseball Music Publishing.
Hi, I'm Tanya Oliveira. I work for Transparence Entertainment Group. I focus on World ex-USA neighbouring rights on the performer side and rights holder side.
Hi, welcome back to Money in the Air, the Neighbouring Rights podcast brought to you by IFR, the International Association for Artists and Rights Holders. And our special guests are Lionel Lodge and Dennis Dreeth. Lionel Lodge, CEO of Sync Lodge, and Dennis Dreeth, Chairman of Transparence Entertainment Group. And between them, they are composers, artists, musicians, and music supervisors. And that's important because today we're going to talk about the music cue sheets for Sync and the information required. Dennis, tell us what you think is the most important information to have on a cue sheet.
So I think we want to kind of back up a half a second from that and say, for everybody who doesn't understand, cue sheets for composers and publishers up to the point really are your gateway to being paid for your work when it's broadcast. If you don't have all your music listed on a cue sheet, chances are you're not going to be paid royalties when the program that you've written the music for or songs you publish is used in the television, the motion picture, all those kind of things. So I will say that in the past, cue sheets really served the purpose of the PROs, the ASCAP, CSAC, PRS, those kind of organizations. So the cue sheets served their purpose and kind of morphed into something that was just designed for that only. And what they needed was the type of how long something was played, what the usage was. Was it a visual background? Was it a main theme? Those kind of things. Many of us working in other areas, audiovisual particularly, began to use cue sheets to find other things, to help identify which portions of a score are underscore versus licensed music and those kind of things. So the one thing I've always felt needed to be included now is some performance information. It's not enough just to include the title of the song, for example, that's licensed in the movie and the publisher, but we need to know if that was an original recording, re-recorded for that movie, or if it's a sound recording. So we've long wanted, in addition to all the other information that's there, really sought to get other information in terms of the sound recording itself. Is it a licensed recording? Who's the artist? What version of that is. So if we could only include those things as well on the cue sheet, we'd be so much further along and be able to help collect audio-visual rights. Now the cue sheet is morphed into something more important than just something that the performance rights organizations use. Now CMOs are beginning to rely on those for a great deal of information.
I happen to agree. It's one of the things that we've put on that's never on a cue sheet, in my experience, is the ISRC number. And of course, you don't have neighboring rights unless you have an ISRC number. And one of the things that we found very important in dealing with producers is having them register the recordings softly and as a release. So they have an ISRC number with them as rights holders if it's not a pre-existing recording.
Couldn't agree more. I think in those ISRCs really identify exactly which specific sound recording, for example, is used. That is so important. And if we can just get even just that, I realize it's a push to get things, but just even one more piece of information would be hugely important.
One of my frustrations with cue sheets is that there so far hasn't been a standard. And being a tech company, we come up against the problem with not having standards in a basic document like a cue sheet. It's a basic tool and it's used all over the world, but every PRO seems to have a different format for it. And with different formats, machines can't easily read them. People can, but you can't actually put it through the work chain. If you're sending it to ASCAP or BMI, do they actually physically put it in? Do they type everything back in? How do they read these things? Unless I'm doing it under their format. Visual production company, and I'm going to have something released in the States, and maybe I'm going to also have it released in the UK, and maybe in Australia, then I have to build different cue sheets for all, which is frustrating. I really like the idea of having a standard, coming up with a standard. And the talk about putting in, for the first time, the recording information, yes, this seems like a basic thing. The information is there. when the people are putting the music into the visual production. They do have that information. They're dealing with the master rights owners. So why not put that into the cue sheet? We can even,
Yeah.
and on top of it, we've talked about putting in the performers as well for the
That's
neighboring
right.
rights. Well,
Yep.
let's have one document that covers all the stakeholders that should be covered as far as for usage in visual production. Let's have one document that covers everybody. This will be a wonderful thing.
I agree completely with you as well. Gina, do you ever register cue sheets as evidence with, say, PPL or any other CMO?
To be honest with you, I don't. We see very, very few, but I'm totally there with Lionel. If only we were provided with them and if only they contain the performer information, it would ensure that we could make so many more claims for the artists correctly and ensure that all their roles are listed as well, because that's the point, is we don't always know. We would know a musician features on a recording, but we don't necessarily know all the roles. And because so many societies pay on multiple roles, we know PPL doesn't, but we know Germany do, for example, and Senna do. We want to know all those roles to make sure that we can claim the maximum for them. So yes, please, let's get one unison type style cue sheet that we can all use.
That's great. Yep, absolutely. When we finalize it, we will put it up in the members area of the IFR website so everyone can use it, download it and use it. Tanya, what's your experience with cue sheets?
I had a couple of clients who would produce cues, write cues, perform on the cues. You know, they did everything. They would send me their PRS kind of cue sheet details, which had a lot of info like ASCAP and BMI and such. But of course, you know, it didn't tell me who's the artist, you know, who performed what's the ISRC. So then I would have to take their word and they'd be like, I did all the instruments and my name as the songwriter name is also the artist name. And that would allow me to register the cues at certain societies. Yeah, Germany, Belgium, there is another one that escapes me right now that don't need ISRCs. So I could get them some income from some European territories that way.
Would this new cue sheet template help if it had all the additional information?
Oh yeah, definitely. It means I could register cues in more territories more efficiently. Definitely, yeah. Because yeah, as you know, an ISRC is so important, and a lot of countries require them, but a couple in Europe, they don't need them. So that's why I just went ahead and did what I could there.
Sound exchange per se does not directly deal with audiovisual rights. All the audiovisual rights for sound exchange are passed through the AF and SAG-AFTRA fund. So even the featured artist performances are captured and collected initially by the AF and SAG-AFTRA fund and passed through to Sound Exchange. So what happens is Sound Exchange is not the entity that will be looking for the cue sheets. The AF and SAG-AFTRA fund, however, relies heavily on those cue sheets. Cue sheet is, you know, in the US, when it's registered with one PRO, that information is shared. They register with all of them. So when you get the ASCAP dump, you get all the cue sheets that you need, and the AF and SAG-AFTRA fund is the entity that really does that. So Sound Exchange really doesn't have any interest in doing that. They don't do the research for actually who's on the sound recordings. Part of the difference there, the AV rights are an important right to the fund, primarily because they also collect all those rights for non-featured performers. So the cue sheets are certainly a major component of being able to identify what's underscore, what's a licensed sound recording, because they all have different components and different royalty rates that go with that. So it is critical. And my understanding of the proposed law is that it really will not include a protected right for AV the way it is in Europe. So that's still carved out slightly different. So it does, for Sound Exchange to really have a direct interest, it really has to be, even with the new law, it'd have to really be an audio only broadcast. It would really be a component of that. I do want to point out that, you know, as bad as our situation is with cue sheets, I'm probably the person who's been, you know, there from the beginning or the longest in this. And I remember the day when not only did we have different cue sheets for every PRO, but every studio, every production company, in some cases, every composer had their own format. You know, and it was, so it wasn't until the PROs began to say, you have to like conform to our format, which was a huge, you know, improvement, you know, and what happened is when there was just no consistent format, even among the PRO, things fell through the cracks in an enormous amount. So we have come a long way, not to mean that we don't have a great deal more to do, and we have a much longer way to go, but the whole thing is, and I couldn't agree more with Lionel, that we're really, you know, a standardized form across all platforms, all PROs. It can be used for various things. And no matter what we do with the cue sheet, we still will have the problem of the non-featured performers. On large orchestral scores, we have on any given session in excess of 100 musicians covered over the course of several days of recording. We can have as many as 300 or 400 musicians on a particular score. And I don't see any format that's going to be able to parse out who was on each particular cue. But still, the artist associated with the sound recordings and, and who was the conductor in the session, all those kind of the key information, but at least give us a clue about where to look for the other things. So it's not going to be a panacea to our problems, but it's certainly going to be a huge, huge step to solving, or at least being able to give us the tools to find out ways to solve the problems.
Thanks, Dennis. That's a really important distinction and a really good insight into how the land lies there. What will they be included in the new law with broadcast if it's not audio visual?
It would be everything audio, in other words, terrestrial radio, so AM, FM radio, all the basically it's to cover that. There's been a real push here. In the US, we are very much behind the rest of the world in many types of protections. And right now, since we don't have, complete protection in audio only. So as you know, our broadcast rights, AM, FM radio, is just not a protected right for performers. The new law, when enacted, I want to say when, because it's been if for a long time. I feel that, sooner or later it's coming, and it'll probably come at a time when we finally get that, and the rest of the world has finally agreed that streaming should have a neighboring right, and we'll still be behind the curve on that. But nonetheless, we are catching up. But the new law really will cover just basically what is traditional broadcast rights. Audiovisual has been pushed really hard, and the MPAA themselves has been our biggest sort of hurdle in terms of audiovisual, because they view it as that they can collect that money here. The only real rights that are paid to performers for broadcast is through a union agreement, through collective bargaining. And so the industry themselves has pushed very hard against that. I think, incorrectly assuming that they'd have to share the wealth, not realizing that there's, additional wealth that's going to go to them as the rights holder. But they've been our biggest sort of roadblock in any kind of audiovisual right. And as anybody who's dealt with the U.S. Congress knows, what they want is they want the parties to agree and bring a solution to them. As soon as there's a rift between any of the parties, what happens is they just say, you guys go figure this out and come back to us when you have a solution. And of course, that's been years and years, in the making. But audiovisual rights are becoming increasingly important, and at least at Transparency, we're seeing some pretty significant increases for our performers who are actually involved in that part of it. And still the fact that we get royalties from Spain, Germany, and Brazil are the primary sources that pay U.S. performers absent any kind of reciprocity is significant, and we certainly hope that we can expand that. And a protected audiovisual right in this country would be a huge boon, because it would give us the right to go seek those rights in other territories.
Thank you. Thank you for clearing that up.
So just to clarify, the AFM is not receiving any audiovisual from US sources. Like broadcasters are not paying the AFM audiovisual anything. All the audiovisual is coming from international territories that have agreements with the AFM. Yeah, not really with the AFM SAG-AFTRA fund. It's different than the union itself. The union does have collective bargaining agreements that provide a percentage of the producer's gross for exhibition, like when a motion picture is exhibited on cable, on pay television, and those kinds of things, or in other home video markets. But that's collective bargain, and it is money that comes out of the producer's pocket, not a broadcaster.
So the things that we thought were important to add, besides the normal cue sheet stuff, like who the production company is and who the agency is if it's an ad, we want to know precisely who's filling out this form, and we want them to sign off on it. And we want them to get signatures from the people giving them the information, like the producers and the directors and the liaisons and the distributors. Other things that we've added, like we've said, the ISRC, the performers, all the performers, featured and non-featured. And we want the composer to sign off as well, because the score is so important. It can't be lumped in. It needs to be acknowledged separately. And we've also included the broadcast and distribution information. So it gives you the whole supply chain and all the parties involved and all the information about usages.
It's very important. It's not just whether or not it's doable. I think it really needs to be changed. I think the systems need to be updated. And this is something that, looking at many different cue sheets, we came up with, some had in the main information about the production, some had different bits of information, but having it inclusive, like you said, covering all the aspects of the production and having different people sign off on it. I think this is very important, because if it's not done right, then the people that should be paid don't get paid. That is it is a piece of paperwork that supplies people's livelihood. And so it has to really be done correctly.
Thank you so much, everyone. This was a great episode. I really learned a lot. And thank you guys for listening. And remember, go to www.iafar.co.uk and become a member. Have a good week.